South Africa's men and women in blue have not been spared from the criminals and the lawlessness that we've just been talking about. So they too fall victim to violent crimes and sexual assault, as well as the daunting prospect of losing their lives in the line of duty. This is the sad reality facing law enforcement officials, and to discuss this further, we're joined by Popcru spokesperson Richard Mamabolo. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, Richard. But before we get into some of those specific issues that police also face as human beings living in South Africa, let's talk about this issue of the increased criminal activity at police stations, where criminals are targeting the stations and stealing guns. There are two reasons here. It's either there's a lot of negligence that happens within police stations, or there are criminals that have infiltrated the policing system to allow this to happen. What are your thoughts of the conversation you've just heard?
Good afternoon to you and the viewers. We think that one of the factors that has led to such incidents taking place is the fact that most of our police stations are under-resourced, especially those which are within townships and rural areas as compared to those which are within affluent areas. Just this year alone, there have been 7 reported attacks on police stations, and in all of these police stations, what is quite common is the very same issue that you're talking about, wherein firearms are stolen. And of course, we would imagine that these firearms would then be further used to perpetuate criminal activities. So it is quite a worrying trend. We think that the infrastructural integrity of our police stations in these areas should be one of the priorities that the SAPS actually looks into. We have, of course, had different engagements with the relevant authorities and the minister as well. But one thing that always comes about through these discussions is the fact that there are limited budgets to actually ensure that we deal with the uneven allocation of resources within the SAPS. So resources are quite a major factor in addressing some of these challenges.
So in your engagements with the national department in terms of those resources, has there been any political will to deploy them sooner rather than later? Because you heard in our previous conversation that the increase in guns in different parts of the country means that the rate of crime will increase. That will further burden police, who are already, as you say, under-resourced. So what is the tone that you are getting at a national level in terms of deploying the necessary resources?
Look, despite the fact that we've got an understanding around the challenges and how they need to be addressed with the ministry, part of the problem has been the fact that, you find the president of the country saying one thing and the minister of finance doing the exact opposite. For example, we noted, of course, the president noted in his State of the Nation address 2 years back that we need to have violent crimes by half within the next decade. And immediately after that, you had the Minister of Finance cutting the budget of the SAPS. This year alone, the budget was cut by 15.8 billion rands, and they're planning to cut it even further by 11.2 billion rands in the next year. So the staff complement of the SAPS has been on a decline. And of course, you know that we've got a rising population, and yet all these resources which would obviously ensure that we get more staff complement. We actually deal with the uneven allocation of resources at stations. It's something that cannot happen without the necessary budgetary considerations. So there is a lack of political will, we might say, in ensuring that we deal with these matters. Just recently, we were also talking about the killing of tourists in Mpumalanga. Under any circumstances where crime rates are high, you would not obviously have conditions where investors would want to come and bring in their investments into the country. And that is part of the reasons why we are arguing that perhaps we need to have a policing endeavor, which would obviously not look into all certain aspects of the challenges, but look into all aspects of these challenges where in communities as well get involved in finding solutions around how we fight crimes. Because if we are to come up with solutions individually, we do not think that it will have a bigger impact as opposed to when communities do get involved.
Yes, no, absolutely. Community policing forums are absolutely critical at this stage. Richard, how do you deal with the safety of actual police officers in the stations? I mean, how safe are they? There have been discussions that private security firms must be employed to guard and protect stations, but then that beats the purpose of being a police officer in South Africa. So maybe talk to that for us.
Most definitely, we think that it would be a futile exercise to actually get more private securities. We think that the infrastructural integrity should be improved. We think as well the fact that, well, if you increase the staff complement, it will be much more safer, because what is currently happening is that there's a linear staff complement, whereas you would find under normal circumstances that there are 5 police officers working overnight in a single police station. So that only creates vulnerabilities. And the fact that there's currently load shedding as well even worsens the situation, because it then therefore means that police would not be able to respond to community calls, but as well it creates some form of backlogs that will obviously in the long run result in cases being delayed because of the processing of paperwork that needs to go to the different courts within different areas. Those are some of the issues we need to address. Police are being killed on a regular basis as well. We've got 155,000 officers in the country, and about 30% of them are office-based. So the lack of manpower as well would be some of the things that need to be addressed in the immediate, and then of course look into how we can restructure the SAPS in the long run and ensure that part of the numbers of police who are based at provincial and national offices actually are cascaded down to stations where crime is actually taking place.
And then to add to that, a final thought from you, Richard. You have declared as a union a dispute with government when it comes to wage negotiations on wage increases for your members. What is going to happen? Are you going to be going on strike, or are you going back to the negotiation table?
Our bargaining team is currently in talks, and we think by the end of, early next week rather, we would be in a position to say what next measure we do take. However, at the moment, engagements are still ensuing.